All right, welcome everyone. Hope everyone had a nice lunch and a little bit of networking this afternoon. We're going to kick off and try and stay on time as well as we possibly can. We have four great presenters today. They'll be having 20 minutes each. We'll have 2 minutes for conversation with people that are online, so I'll get that through the Q&A and through the app and probably ask those questions. If we don't, we think that we need to run them through at the same time, we might also do that. So we'll stay fairly agile throughout this session. Otherwise, it's at the end. We'll have 10 minutes. You can ask any questions at that point in time. I think that's all I had to cover off. Could we just make sure that while you're outside in that break, you might have been making phone calls, make sure your phones are on silent, if that's okay, please. And we'll kick off. So our first speaker is Miss Catherine Ning, Manager of Commercial Waste and Recycling, City of Melbourne. I'll give everyone a bit of a bio in case you haven't read the form guide. Catherine has over 8 years' experience in the environmental sector, mostly working in strategy and policy roles for the Victorian Government. Her current roles focus on development of commercial waste strategy for the central city to reduce the number of private vehicles and storage within the realm of the city, minimise truck movements to resolve the associated amenity and impacts. Would you please welcome Catherine?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Kat. As said, I'm the Manager of Commercial Waste and Recycling over in the City of Melbourne, and today I'm going to talk about the shared garbage compactor and recycling hub facilities that we have for our businesses there. Just an acknowledgement of country. This conference is located in the Gumbaynggirr lands, and we respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on and pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So, just a quick overview, the waste and recycling hubs are shared facilities that we have for our commercial businesses to use, and this project actually fits within our City of Melbourne's Waste and Recycling Strategy 2030, and it is used to drive some of the, and achieve some of those targets that we've got there. So why shared facilities? So as you can see from this photo, that laneway is Literature Lane. It's one of the smaller laneways within our City of Melbourne, and there were about 50 bins that were sitting out throughout the laneway and then bending backwards there as well. So the shared facilities, and that's all prior to the shared facilities being installed. In particular, we're aiming to really improve the visual appeal and odor of the laneway, decrease a lot of the noise impacts that we're getting from waste collections and truck movements, decrease the antisocial behavior that we're finding in that laneway, and discourage illegal dumping as well in that area. So as you all know, waste attract waste. So, you know, illegal dumping, we're just trying to hopefully get rid of all of that was going on behind the bins. Last of all, we were hoping to uplift and activate the laneway and drive more economic benefits if, you know, there were more people that were passing through that area as well. We also really wanted to create a more effective source separation system for our businesses because, as you can see, most of our businesses there only actually have a landfill bin, and prior to our shared facilities there. So within that waste and recycling hub, we currently collect 4 material streams from that hub. So we've got landfill, cardboard, commingled, and also food organics. Our business organic service actually started in March 2024, and that is a month prior to when the hubs was actually installed. We wanted the businesses to get into a habit of actually separating their food waste out of their garbage before our mini compactor went in. And this was done with Good Cycles, which is a social enterprise. How it works is that Good Cycles would be on e-bikes, they would drive up to the business, and then a business would hand over a 22-liter tub full of food organics, and then Good Cycles would then exchange it for clean, empty tubs. And because due to that high frequency of interactions that we have with them in person, we actually get really good, we are able to provide very immediate feedback in terms of contaminants that we were finding in their tubs, and therefore our food service actually only has like less than 1% contamination. Additionally, we needed the food out because, as you can see, the mini compactors are quite tiny. We needed to really try to get all of that out so that organics then free up more space within the mini compactor and we don't have as many collections within that space. So the Waste and Recycling Hub, that started in April 2024, and we currently have 17 businesses that are participating within the Hub's program. On average, our mini compactor is currently being collected every second day, and businesses are disposing of about 300 kilos a day of garbage. Cardboard is collected 1 or 2 times a day, depending on weekdays, weekends, and we get around 33 to 34,000 liters a week. Commingled collected twice a day. That is around 17 to 18 liters a week. And the food organics is a daily collection, but then the frequency depends on the business. So, if you're open all day, then it could be up to 3 collections a day, or if you're only open for nighttime, then it could just be 1 collection a day. And for the food organics, we currently collect about 500 kilograms a day from that particular site. Onto the fun technology side of things. So this is our mini waste compactor, and this was co-designed with Waste Tech. They've actually got a booth. Feel free to visit them. So we co-designed this to fit into very small, compact spaces. There were actually a lot of challenges trying to fit all of the features that City of Melbourne wanted in with a compactor because we wanted, restricted access. So, our businesses have to use a swipe card system to access this. And then therefore we can track, how often people are using it, how much they're throwing away. We wanted the waste to be weighed and NMI certified, so then we can eventually charge by weight. So then also we can then provide all of this feedback back to the individual businesses as well. We also wanted error notifications so that the operational team, when for example, a business threw in too much food, threw in too much waste into our mini compactor and it's jammed, is this something that they could remotely restart, or is this something that they have to then send a technician out on site to fix? So with all of that, it was quite a challenging design process, but we got there at the end. So it currently holds about 3,000 liters of waste, which translates to about 1 ton, or a conservative estimate of around 1,100 liter bins that goes in there. We also wanted it to be visually appealing within the laneway, so we have our artwork on top of that. This particular one is done by an artist called Michelle Pereira, and because of our 2 collection systems, this particular mini compactor also has a custom tug connection for our electric tug and fork pockets for our side loader forklift. Because big collection vehicles just don't fit into these laneways where we'll have a mini compactor, we did have to find compact solutions, and one of these is our side loader forklift. And actually both of the collection systems are actually world first in a city environment, so we're pretty chuffed with that particular bit. And usually these side loader forklifts are used in warehousing or industrial estates. So we worked with Bowman to customize this one because we needed it to be roadworthy, since it needs to actually go to our depot to dispose of the waste, and also it needed to be suitable for waste collecting and emptying waste. So it's quite small, as you can see. It can lift up to 6 tons, which is more than what we need it for. It's got a very small turning circle. Because it's EV, there's almost no noise associated with that. And also the fork rotator, that was fitted so then we can actually tip waste out. And we have a whole lot of customized safety as well for our driver. So you can kind of see it in operation, and I'll show you a video later to actually see how it all works, but it basically picks it up from the side onto the side loader forklift, and then they drive it to our depot, they tip it back, they open the rear door, they tip it out, and then it just goes back into place. So the side loader forklift only travels 24 kilometers an hour, and the entire process is about an hour. So this is actually usually done in the early hours of the morning because we weren't keen for angry city drivers to call City of Melbourne. The second one that we use is the electric tug. So this tug is usually used in industrial estates to move really heavy equipment. This particular one is a Sidecraft electric tug, and we did have to customize it a little bit so that we have, so that it would actually connect onto our mini compactor at the front. As you can see, it has a really good towing capacity and a lift capacity, which is more than what we need for as well. And it is very compact. It has a really small turning circle, which means that we can actually get this into laneways where our side loader wouldn't even fit. And with that, we also have, you know, like it's really easy to operate with minimal force. As you can see, one person can operate it. It's just, it's with the power steering and all that kind of stuff. It's got a decent 6 to 8 hour of a runtime and 4 to 6 hours of recharge time. Currently, we only have one site that is using it, but within this financial year, we're hoping to roll out 3 more sites, so then that, you know, runtime will actually come into play. So the entire process is basically we will have, so the tray that is connected to the hook lift is actually custom designed for us as well. The driver basically gets to the site, unhooks the tug from the tray, and then moves it to the compactor, connects it onto the compactor, back onto the tray. The tray then has, is clipped in, sorry, the tray then has the side bars to clip in the tug and the mini compactor, and the entire thing is taken off site. So when we get to the depot, the rear door is unlocked, nothing comes off the tray, it just gets tipped out and then closed and then back into the laneway as well. So this one is actually a little bit faster because the hook lift truck actually goes not 24 kilometers an hour, so you know it is whatever the speed limit is on the roads. So it's usually a little bit under an hour from what I remember.
We've co-designed a mini waste compactor to fit in small spaces. A lot of the standard waste trucks don't fit into those laneways, so we've had to use these innovative solutions to get in and out of the laneways to collect waste. We're using 2 different collection systems, which is the first time in the world they've been used in a city environment. These facilities have really helped to improve amenity in our laneways. We've reduced the number of bins in the laneway, the number of trucks coming in and out of the laneways, and help businesses to recycle better. Keep an eye out for more mini waste compactors at our new hubs throughout the central city.
So that kind of showed you how the 2 collection system works, and how it actually works really, really well within the City of Melbourne, the really narrow laneways that we've got. And here's a little bit of a before and after shot of that particular laneway. So you can see the amenity has drastically improved since we've got our shared facilities in there. We've received lots of positive feedback from our businesses, but also predominantly from our residents within that area, because you know there's, as City of Melbourne is, you know, most of it is businesses down the bottom, and then it's just residentials on top. So we're very pleased that we're also able to get this in at the end of that particular laneway. So currently it's a closed system, but there's a Metro Tunnel project that is going to finish next financial year. So then we're expecting a lot more through traffic, and getting this in before then was really vital to actually just cleaning it up before we get a lot of foot traffic in the area. So yeah, that concludes my presentation. So open up for questions.
I've got 2 questions. One is, you can see that there are private contractors here, so they're not all City of Melbourne. How was that dealt with? And secondly, there's a lot of custom equipment, which is costly, no doubt. Is there no off-the-shelf equipment that could be used? Other councils looking at this and thinking, that's going to cost me a bomb.
Well, in terms of the mini compactor is now, basically a product that that Waste Tech is offering on their brochures. So that's actually no longer, I guess, custom. It was just that we built it specifically to fit into our laneways. With the Bowman side loader and the Sidecraft tug, it was very minor amendments to it. So realistically, the customization was actually pretty simple and straightforward on that front. But yes, there was definitely a cost involved in actually designing all of that with the contractors in that space. And the contractor bins. So yes, in terms of the City of Melbourne, predominantly businesses do use private waste contractors. Not many of them are on council service. Only those that are rateable are on council service. So with bins in the public realm, City of Melbourne actually has the power to say, you no longer are allowed to store your bins here. Your options are either to go onto our waste facility and use our shared facility, or else your bins have to be stored internally. And anywhere that usually we have a waste and recycling hub, we don't issue permits for them to store it externally. Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting. Loved it. I'm just wondering if you know of whether or not something similar has been used in medium or high density living.
I know that there are compactors that are used in high density living. So usually, I think some of our residential tower actually have compactors inside, but they're not that small. So yeah.
Good presentation, thank you. Just in terms of this new compactor bins, how many are you intending or have you installed, and what is have you actually calculated one is the life cycle of these bins, and in terms of the operational cost, how it compares to, was it part of your budget, or has it dropped significantly, increased? Has there been any kind of, can you give some kind of indication on that? Thank you.
So in terms of the mini compactors, those are Waste Techs, and I think they'll be able to probably quote prices. But in terms of the life cycle of, I think all compactors are around 7 years lifespan. For our mini compactor, we're just estimating it's about the same amount of time, although, obviously it was only last year, so we're kind of having to test the upper limits of a lot of these kind of things. Sorry, what was your other part of the question? The operational cost was factored into this. So in terms of the operational cost, what we're trying to do, especially because this one is going to be able to charge by weight, we're going to try to recover as much of the operational cost through that as possible. So when we've worked out the number in terms of obviously how much it costs to put in, plus also the ongoing operational costs, what we're going to do is per kilo cost for the garbage compactor, and then it'll just be what it costs over the life cycle, and then we'll just cost recover that way. Ideally, currently our recycling facilities are all bin based, but we're looking at other technologies that we can weigh as well, and then we will cost recover as much as possible. Only we're going to be using the principles of organics and cardboard and commingled are going to be cheaper, and your most expensive option is always going to be landfill.
Is that on? Yep. Just quickly, maintenance breakdown, any issues, and the contingency if it's unavailable for the businesses?
So we do have emergency bins on site. They do get thrown open when our compactor is off-site being emptied. So there's a lock on them, obviously, but usually we're emptying them at like 3 or 4 in the morning when none of the businesses are really operating. But they are open just in case someone needs it. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. It's nice to see some of those innovative ideas that come from industry finally sneak through to local government to help out how we work in our commercial centres. Our second presenter is Miss Alex Kite-Beattie. Alex is a senior environmental consultant for Tonkin and Taylor with 9 years experience in New Zealand and Australia. And with a background in earth science, Alex has a broad range of experience across different aspects of the environment, assessment and compliance, which has led her to her strategic work in waste management, resource recovery and a circular economy. Would you please welcome Alex to the lectern? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. So, in 2020, Recycling Victoria launched a 10-year circular economy policy. The policy includes the following reforms that are related to household recycling. Access for all Victorian households to a 4-stream waste and recycling system. So that's food organics and garden organics, or FOGO, separated glass, other commingled recycling, and residual waste. It included the standardisation of curbside services across all local government authorities, including the colours of each bin lid and the exact items that are included in each bin. And the policy committed to the introduction of the Container Deposit Scheme, or CDS, which was launched in Victoria in November 2023. The Victorian CDS currently accepts certain glass containers, but not wine or spirits bottles. In 2024, the state government published the draft service standards, which outline how this 4-stream waste and recycling service needs to be delivered. The objectives of the service standard are to make recycling simpler, to reduce emissions, to capture a greater value of recyclables so that less raw materials need to be extracted, and to reduce the amount of household waste that goes to landfill. So the implication of these legislative reforms is that by the 1st of July 2027, all LGAs in Victoria will need to comply with the service standards, including the requirement to provide a separate curbside glass bin. A regulatory impact statement, the RIS, was published in 2024, and the RIS presents a case that Victorian councils will incur an overall reduction in operational costs and disposal costs if the proposed reforms for curbside glass and FOGO are implemented. TNT was approached last year by a group of 22 councils who wanted to improve their understanding of the impact of the proposed service changes in terms of meeting the needs of their communities, providing value for money, and effectively contributing to both local and national circular economy goals, along with broader sustainability goals. The research and modelling project that we undertook to address these questions included 2 main parts. The first is a research component that sought to gain local and international insights into a number of questions. With limited time today, I can only run through the main questions that we addressed, and I'll include 1 or 2 key insights where that's relevant to the material that I'll be presenting today. We had conversations with material recovery facility and glass beneficiation plant operators, and overall, there was a lot less emphasis on the need for a separated glass stream than we expected. We heard that receiving glass through the commingled recycling stream doesn't impact the ability of these operators to access recycling markets, and that they haven't experienced higher prices for other recyclate, like paper and cardboard, that come from glass-free recycling collections. We looked into the current material flow of recycled glass in Victoria, and also both the current and future capacity for glass recycling in Victoria. We looked at differences in the impact and the outcome from collecting glass in commingled versus separate curbside bins. So there are various studies looking at how much glass is recovered through both these different options, and also lifetime environmental impacts of glass that's collected through both of these different bins. We looked at the greenhouse gas emissions of recycled glass versus glass that's produced from virgin materials, and also the emissions of recycling glass to glass versus recycling glass into aggregates. We looked at the impact of expanding the CDS acceptance to include wine and spirits bottles in other Australian states. and we looked at the market forces impacting the value and the demand for recycled glass in Victoria. The second part of the project involved collecting information from the participating 22 councils on their current waste operations. The data that we collected included the cost of service provision, including collection, bulk haulage, processing and disposal, material capture, so the quantity and composition of material collected in the existing stream, the in-house resources that were required to deliver the existing waste services, and any emissions data that these councils had relating to their existing curbside collections. This data was then aggregated to represent a typical council. So it's important to note that this typical council is representative only of the participating councils. It's not an average of all Victorian councils or anything like that. So here's an example of some of the key assumptions and characteristics of this typical council and how they compare to the assumptions in the Regulatory Impact Statement, or the RIS. Again, I don't have time to go through this table in detail, so I'll just give a quick overview. The top 3 rows in the table show the amount of waste in the curbside bins. And you can see that the RIS assumes more waste is being captured in the general waste bin and considerably less in the commingled recycling bin than what we saw for the typical council. However, overall, the quantity of curbside waste is really similar for the RIS and for the typical council. Now, the RIS was developed before the Victorian CDS was launched, and it predicted a 17% reduction in the quantity of commingled recycling due to the introduction of the CDS. This was higher than the data from councils, which reflected nearly a year of CDS operation, and that showed an 8% reduction. We used the characteristics of this typical council to model 4 different scenarios for waste collection, which were developed with the aim of understanding how both adding a separate curbside glass collection and expanding the acceptance criteria of the CDS to include wine and spirits bottles could address the aims of the new regulations. During the research phase of the project, we found evidence to suggest that including wine and spirits bottles in the CDS has improved the overall capture of glass in other Australian states. So this was considered as an option both alongside and instead of a curbside glass collection. So the 4 scenarios that we modelled for the typical council were the status quo, commingled recycling, and the CDS as it is, the status quo plus a separate curbside glass collection, option 3, the status quo plus what we're calling an optimised CDS, so accepting wine and spirits bottles through the CDS, and all 4. So a separate glass side collection at the curbside and also an optimised CDS. These scenarios were all modelled based on the typical council inputs. Additionally, a 5th outcome was modelled, which used the assumptions that were presented in the RIS. And it's important to remember in the following slides that the results that are shown as RIS results aren't results that were presented in the RIS, but the results of the model that we ran using the assumptions that were presented in the RIS. The first output that I'd like to share is the cost of providing the collection services. So on this graph, the y-axis shows the net cost of providing each of the modelled scenarios for the typical council per property. The cost is for delivering all of the curbside services, so collection, processing and disposal of glass, commingled recycling, general waste and FOGO. The cost includes both operational costs and also an annualised implementation cost. And along the x-axis, you can see the 4 scenarios that we modelled, plus the model being run on the assumptions set out in the RIS. You can see that the net costs for providing a separate glass service, so that's options 2 and 4, are higher than the 2 options without separated glass, and they're also higher than the RIS model. However, it's really important to note that there's only a $36 difference between the highest and the lowest net cost. And as you can see from the error bars, there isn't a significant difference between any of the options or the RIS option. We use sensitivity settings to test some of the assumptions of the model outputs, and collection costs, which include the purchase of bins, were found to be the greatest proportion of the cost for the options that include a separate glass collection. Options 2, 3 and 4 all included savings on disposal costs compared to the status quo, due to a modelled reduction of glass winding up in the general waste bin. And for options 3 and 4, the increased capture of glass through the CDS also resulted in a small cost offset through increased CDS revenue for councils. However, that was really minor in the scale of the costs. This graph shows the modelled cost and modelled gross cost of providing the waste collection. Again, we've got total annual cost on the y-axis, but this time it's the total cost for the typical council rather than broken down per property. The cost of providing a FOGO service, which is shown in green, is consistent across all 4 modelled scenarios. And there's only a very slight variation in the cost of the general waste service, shown in red. The commingled recycling service, shown in yellow, decreases slightly where a separate glass collection is offered. However, this decrease is vastly offset by the costs of the glass service, which you can see shown in purple. And then the cost for implementing the separate glass service are those tiny grey bars at the top. When you look at just the commingled recycling and glass costs, there's a notable difference between the costs modelled from the typical council data and those modelled from the RIS assumptions. So if we zoom in on just the commingled and glass options from the outputs from the RIS and from option 2, which is the service option that's equivalent to what was presented in the RIS, we can see the scale of that difference. So the difference between these 2 outputs suggests that the cost of delivering recycling services has increased markedly since the RIS was developed. Additionally, the RIS assumes a much lower implementation costs for councils than the data that we collected from the council suggests. So implementation costs include bin purchase and delivery, project management that's associated with delivering a glass service, procurement and contract negotiation, planning, education, and administration. The RIS assumes that councils will receive funding that will cover a significant portion of these implementation costs, which is why the RIS cost is much smaller. Funding wasn't factored into the typical council model, and overall, as you can see, the implementation costs aren't really a significant driver of the cost differences. Aside from cost, the other main consideration for the model was material recovery. This graph shows the annual tonnes of material covered across the 4 scenarios and based on the RIS assumptions. Again, commingled recycling is shown in yellow, glass collected from the curbside glass bin is shown in purple, collected just from the curbside is shown in purple, and glass collected from the CDS is in blue. The quantity of commingled recycling is consistent across all 4 scenarios, with a separate curbside glass collection slightly increasing the amount of glass captured, so it's the purple, in options 2 and 4. Expanding the CDS in options 3 and 4 diverts some glass away from curbside collections, but overall the quantity of glass that's collected is similar to that in scenarios 1 and 2, which model the current CDS. Overall, there's a very minor difference in material recovery between the different scenarios, suggesting that changes to the curbside service may not result in a significant improvement in material capture. You'll have seen that there's a notable difference between the amount of material recovered between the assumptions in the RIS and the recent data provided by council. This difference is likely to be due to differences in how the waste generation data was derived. For example, it isn't clear whether the RIS accounts for all waste that's available in each stream or just the waste that's sorted into the correct bin. We used sensitivity settings to consider the impact of waste generation and material capture on the material that's recovered. And we found that higher rates of material capture, so a system that's already collecting a really high quantity of material, saw less benefit in introducing a separate glass collection. This suggests that councils with a low rate of material capture now may have the most to gain from introducing a separate glass service in terms of glass capture. And the last aspect of the service that the model considered was carbon emissions. Emission sources that were considered included both the additional emissions from running a separate glass curbside collection and reduced carbon emissions related to increased glass recycling, reducing the need to extract raw materials. From our conversations with industry during the research phase of the project, we heard that a significant portion of glass is already recycled glass to glass, and based on this, the model assumes that emissions reductions only apply to glass that's captured in each of the new glass that's captured in each of the scenarios, so not to glass that's already been captured through the CDS or the commingled recycling bin. Race through this, I heard the bell. So this is a high-level emissions assessment that shows all three modelled scenarios in terms of the overall net benefit, so reduction in carbon emissions, compared to the status quo. Both options 2 and 4 have a net reduction in CO2 equivalent of around 300 tonnes a year, which is roughly equivalent to the annual carbon emissions of about 24 Victorian residents. So the additional capture of glass and benefits of recycling that glass over extracting raw materials outweigh the emissions from the additional trucks needed to collect the glass in the first place. And you can see that the optimised CDS without a separate glass collection also has shows a net benefit, but it's a lot lower than the other options. To wrap up, overall, the research and modelling provides some evidence to suggest that separated glass collections might be beneficial for accessing glass-to-glass recycling and for carbon emissions. However, it's not straightforward. The costs and benefits of a separate glass collection depend on a range of factors that will be different for each council, and the real-world impact will depend on education, community behaviour, the efficiency of recycling collection, and the efficiency of downstream processing. Our modelling didn't identify a significant difference between costs per property for any of the scenarios that we modelled using the typical council data, and we weren't able to replicate the overall net financial benefit for implementing a separate curbside glass collection that was presented in the RIS. The councils that we were working for on this project wanted to better understand how the proposed changes would meet their community's needs, provide value for money, and contribute to circular economy and sustainability goals. Overall, we found that these costs and benefits vary from council to council and are really impacted by the values and the key drivers of each different community. Our typical council model provides a useful framework that we've subsequently been able to use to drill down into the costs and benefits for individual councils, tailoring the model to each council's specific context and helping each council to develop their plans for these upcoming service changes. That's the end.
Thank you. Just one question in terms of your analysis. So the basis of your glass, the fourth bin, I presume is on a monthly collection?
Yes, it is for the typical council.
One collection
Yep.
per month. That's yep.
Yes.
Oh, thanks.
Just a quick one. So you standardised the bin lid colours and the inclusions in every bin. Did you standardise the size of every bin? 240 litre all across the four?
And not, no, the bin size isn't isn't part of the service standards, so it's not part of what's being required from the government. So councils will be able to choose their own bin sizes, but we set a certain bin size for the modelling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Home from Bayside. Great presentation. Thank you for information. Just wondering, like, what the population of typical council you looking at? The first one. The second one is what the recovery rates for the commingle come up from the garbage when you do a separate 4-bin system compared to 3-bin system.
So firstly, off the top of my head, I think that the population of the typical council was 58,000 homes. And sorry, what was the second question about recovery from garbage? as to what came out of rubbish? I can't tell you off the top of my head, but can definitely, I've got the report in front of me, so maybe we can have a conversation afterwards. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Special mention, I've been telling a person to join up in the waste industry for probably 20 years and to come to this conference and learn a little bit, and they've come from a greenkeeper, Justin Hudson. Welcome for your first time. Been a long time where he's heard about this conference. Our third presenter, Mr. Andrew Quinn, Technical Director, Waste and Resource Management, SLR Consulting Proprietary Limited. Andrew has over 30 years experience in the waste management area, has worked for the New South Wales EPA, several waste management contractors and consultants. His experience includes strategy, policy development, data analysis, contracts, tender preparation, transfer stations, resource recovery facilities, expert witness in due diligence projects, EISs, etc. Worked right across the sphere in the waste industry, from commercial, industrial, residential, as I said, MRFs, landfills, the whole lot. Also lectured at University of New South Wales in relation to waste. Would you please welcome Andrew? Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. I'm glad you didn't read out all that, because everyone will be put to sleep. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about these things. First of all, who am I and why the hell should you be listening to me? Secondly, what's the difference between AWACS and LAWCS? SLR's AWACS, LAWCS and feasibility study for K2K, which is a development corridor in Randwick Council in Sydney. Council's LAWCS guidelines and how they're applied in practice, what the challenges were, and then a conclusion. So I'm a technical director at SLR. I've been in the waste industry a long time. I started out at the New South Wales Recycling Advisory Unit, and when the EPA was formed, I was there on day one. We were all assumed into the EPA. I worked for a number of waste contractors, particularly Pacific Waste Management, which over a number of years has morphed into Veolia, who you'd be familiar with. I've been a consultant most of that time, for 30 years, initially with Kinhill Engineers, and people who are old enough might remember Kinhill. And I was at GHD for 9 years, and I've been at SLR since 2018, and yes, I have lectured in waste management at the University of New South Wales. So I'm sure you're all sort of, if you're not familiar with vacuum systems, you've heard of them. Essentially, they collect waste and transport it at high speeds through underground pneumatic pipes or tubes. This is more or less what they look like, but if you want to see sort of a working, well, a model, NVAC, who is a supplier, has one out there in that other room, and it looks a bit like this, only in 3D with flashing lights and everything. And if you have any interest in this kind of thing, I suggest you go and have a look and have a chat to them. But you can see that there is several types of entrance points. So you can have chutes going down the middle of blocks of units. You can have public access areas. And then in this particular case, so this is an area-wide system, there's a central collection facility that could be located, you know, some distance away, a kilometre or something like that. And the idea is that you don't need to have trucks going over the surface to get waste from these areas. And in Europe, where these systems are more common, where some places, for example in Scandinavia, have snow on the ground for most of the year, it's this kind of system that allows waste to be collected. It's also used in the Middle East, where you've got very large areas that have a lot of people in them. You can't have trucks necessarily operating across the surface. So there are two main kinds of vacuum systems. The area-wide collection system, this is where waste is sent to a fixed remote collection point like we saw in the diagram. It's compacted and transported for recovery or disposal using sort of normal hook bins and normal trucks. And then there's a local collection system where waste is held in underground tanks for collection by vehicles with automatic suction equipment. And you can see the two kinds here. So there is no central location here. It's just this outlet by the side of the road or somewhere near the edge of the network, and a truck comes and literally sucks the waste out of the containers under the ground. So those of you who are not familiar with Randwick City Council, it's a beachside council in Sydney's eastern suburbs, and that's where it's located. About 135,000 people, and one of the most interesting things about it is that there are more than 60% of its dwellings are multi-unit dwellings, which would make it one of the highest in Australia. And that sort of has a bit of an effect on why council was thinking about this kind of system. So council wanted to investigate the feasibility of an underground waste system in the Kensington to Kingsford Development Corridor, and it's shortened to K2K. This is a corridor along Anzac Parade, which is a major thoroughfare in southern Sydney. It has a light rail system going over the surface. There's a lot of strip shopping, and high-density residential is planned. It's near the University of New South Wales, so a lot of this residential is student accommodation and sort of boarding house type accommodation. Council wanted to reduce the number of bins on the streets, reduce the amount of litter that results from that, and reduce the number of collection vehicles that would be needed to collect these bins and increase recycling. So they appointed SLR to undertake a feasibility analysis of these two systems and whether or not either or both or none would work in this K2K corridor. So to cut a long story short, our conclusions were that the system was viable. Sites identified by council to accommodate a central collection station under an area-wide system were included in the analysis. There were two sites, one near Randwick Racecourse and another one down at Kingsford. However, due to the presence of the light rail, having to install pipes going under Anzac Parade meant that there was significantly high cost involved. So the AWACS, area-wide system, was not viable for Kensington, but viable for Kingsford. Council in the end decided on a type of local area system. There would be no district network or docking stations like we saw in the picture. Instead, council's vacuum collection vehicle would connect to outlets directly on the side of buildings. Now this system has been used elsewhere, but it was not one that was tested or analysed by SLR in its feasibility study. So in order to bring this about, council developed these LAWCS guidelines, and these were for new developments, so there's no retrofitting. Any new development in the K2K corridor would have to comply with these guidelines. 3 streams would be collected: garbage, recyclables and food. And the guidelines provide details on the tank type. So there are a couple of different kinds. So the tanks would be located somewhere in the basement of the building, and chutes would feed into them, and there would be one for each stream, one chute for each stream, and there could be more than one tank for each stream as well. So there are screw and non-screw tanks, so they have an internal auger. Or some could be horizontal and some are vertical. There are different sizes, anything from 1 to 5 cubic metres. They need to be located somewhere, so there's guidelines that talk about the location. It also talks about pipe work going from the tanks, how the bends should be designed, what clearance is required near the ceilings, what the power requirements were, the location of the docking station, somewhere either on the outside of the building or on the street, the vehicle dimensions and the clearance required in order to get it close to the building. And it also required, so anyone that was putting in a development application, having addressed these guidelines, needed to get endorsement by a supplier. Our council had two preferred suppliers, Airbin, which is a Danish company, and Arvac, which is based in Singapore and does some manufacturing in India. They could use their own supplier as well, and there are others. Envac out there is one of them. But they needed to have run it past the supplier to say that the whole system is going to work fine from their point of view. So, in practice, we've done a couple of developments, prepared waste management plans for approval for a couple of these kinds of developments now. We are one of council's preferred consultants for this kind of thing. And we found that in preparing a waste plan, it's very similar to a conventional waste plan for any new development. We get contacted by the developer who says, you know, we're developing this block of flats, we need a waste management plan for approval. We enter into agreement with the developer to prepare the waste plan to council satisfaction. So although council might say, here are our preferred suppliers, we have no relationship with council in that regard. And we provide advice on the tank sizes based on council's residential waste allowances, so many litres per household per week. The docking station type and locations, there are a couple of different kinds of docking station and whereabouts it can go on the street or on the building. And then all the other relevant waste management requirements that are part of a normal waste management plan as well. And then we also make sure that the architects know about these guidelines, and they then need to design the building to take into account all the pipework and the tanks and all that are specified in the guidelines. And we also put the architects in touch with a preferred supplier, one of the two that council has preferred, and we also suggest others. If they want to talk to someone else, that's fine. We can tell them, give them Envac's phone number, and there are others as well. The architects then prepare the drawings showing the system, where the tanks are going to be, where the pipework is going to be, where the docking station is going to be. Some of the suppliers will provide drawings that will then can be used by the architects in their own drawings. And then based on those drawings, we prepare the waste management plan that addresses all the requirements that council has for this kind of development. Now, it wasn't without problems. There are a number of challenges in doing these waste plans. The first was that no collections were allowed on Anzac Parade. The presence of the light rail reduced the number of lanes, so typically it's six lanes, but the light rail goes down the middle, which means that if there is cars parked, there's only one lane of traffic, and in some places there's even less than that. So we couldn't have collection vehicles connecting to the building out on the main road because it's going to block traffic. That meant the collections had to be undertaken from rear lanes or side streets. There could be problems with the collection vehicle manoeuvring in side streets and in lanes because they're narrow. One of the other issues was that the collection vehicle could stand for significant periods of time to collect the streams, and one figure that was quoted was possibly 45 minutes. The collection vehicle could block the lane or side street for that period of time. There were some other issues as well. The suppliers, so Airbin and Arvac, were reluctant to provide free advice, as you might imagine. We dealt mainly with Airbin. They were quite forthcoming initially, but after a while their patience ran out. And unless there was some kind of agreement between the supplier and the developer, then they just were saying, well, look, I think we've given you enough free information, understandably. The docking station often had to be on public land, so how is that going to work? Who is responsible for that? Is it council, or is it the corporation that operates the block of units? There still needs to be storage space for bulky waste, because you can't put bulky waste through this kind of system. So that has to be stored and collected by a conventional vehicle. So in mixed-use developments, of which there are a number in this part of Randwick, there still needs to be space for retail waste. So in one of these buildings, we had shops down the bottom, just like this picture here, with residential above. Retailers couldn't use the vacuum system, so there had to be a bin room for them, or they were storing it on their own property, and bins had to be put out and collected by a contractor in the same way as they would be normally. So these were the kinds of issues that the developer needed to resolve. Some of them were for the developer, but some of them also were for council. I mean, it was council's system and council's vehicle, and council had to decide how collections would be undertaken where streets were blocked off, for example, in order to prevent access onto Anzac Parade. And I'm not sure that those things were resolved ultimately. So, in conclusion, there are two types of underground waste system: an area-wide system and a local area system. Our feasibility study for the K2K corridor found that the system was viable under certain conditions. Council decided on a variation of the local system to collect directly from properties. And they prepared these guidelines in order to assist developers, architects and consultants like us to comply with the system as they would require. In practice, it's similar to a conventional residential or mixed-use development waste plan. We provided advice on tank sizes and locations, docking station type and location. We directed the architects to the guidelines and put them in touch with system suppliers. The architects prepared the drawings, and we prepared a waste management plan based on those drawings. The challenges were that there were issues with vehicle access and standing time. Storage and collection of bulky waste still had to be dealt with. Storage and collection of retail waste also still had to be dealt with. Suppliers won't provide free advice, and council still working through some of these issues. Now, the council officer who was driving this has retired, so it's not immediately clear whether council will continue with this kind of system. I hope they will, but there are still some issues to be resolved that are frustrating for people like me and for developers and architects to deal with. So, any questions?
G'day, thanks for that. Just a question, I mean, we've all got toilets here with a waste vacuum system and getting some blockages in it with the high amount of pressure. How would you resolve that?
Well, in this case, the pipe work is all on the property of the residential development, so it would be the corporation who would need to resolve that. Most of the pipe work is exposed underneath, so access is easy.
Okay.
For area-wide networks, typically the owner or the council or whoever is developing it will enter into a service agreement with the supplier. So they buy and install the pipe work and then enter into a separate agreement in order to maintain it. And if there are any blockages, then it's up to the supplier to fix them. And yes, they can be a problem if they're somewhere in the middle that is inaccessible. There may need to be excavation in order to get to the pipe.
Yeah.
I suggest you ask NVAC that question out there, and I'm sure they've got an answer for it. There might be things that go through the pipes and can dislodge things. I don't know how it works, but I suggest you ask them that kind of thing.
Thank you.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
When it comes to the risk profiling of the chute, the vacuum, is it any different from conventional chute when it comes to things like the disposal of lithium batteries that we're having issues with fires? Was that the consideration, or is there no difference in the risk profile?
I don't know that batteries in particular have been considered. I think they would be treated like anything else. So, for example, if they are disposed of and are resting in a tank in the basement of a block of units, then there's potential, if they were to malfunction and catch alight, then that could be catastrophic. Similarly, if they end up being drawn through the pipework to a central location and they're crushed by a compactor, then again, there's potential for fire in the same way as they would be anywhere else. So I think any council or corporation would be strongly discouraging people from disposing of batteries into the waste system like they would anywhere else. I think that the risk is there, no matter what kind of collection system you have. It's potentially higher in this case if there's a fire in the basement. But then they may well have anti-fire measures as well, sprinkler systems and what have you.
Hello, Kate Beard from SMEC. I was wondering how reliable these things are, and I didn't hear anything about like maceration of the waste. So is it just bin bags that are going into the container and then they're getting hoovered out?
No maceration, it's just put your bag in the chute on your floor, it falls to the basement, and out there in the model you'll see that there are containers below, and it's exactly the same in this case. It just falls directly into a tank, and then when the truck connects to the connection point, the truck and the building talk to each other, and the truck decides which of the tanks it needs to collect, because there's just a single pipe coming out to the street, and it says, okay, I'm going to collect the garbage tank, and it draws the waste out of the tank along the pipe work into the truck, and it could be bags, it could be loose. There's nothing more to it than that. There's no other treatment or maceration or anything like that.
And so I'm interested to know what kind of reliability it has, and if you have any issues like they have in vacuum sewer with like loss of vacuum and holes in the pipework and stuff, and tracking those down.
I think that's a question you probably need to ask a supplier, so NVAC for example, but as far as I know they're reliable. I imagine over time, yes, that kind of thing happens, and they'd need to be maintained like any other working piece of equipment on site, like the air conditioning or the water or anything like that.
Yes, Hong from Bayside. Just wondering the type of collections, the truck collections, is that different with the one that we have right now? If yes, then what the capacity for the truck to collect, and then how it compared to the normal compactor we have?
Look, I don't know the exact capacity, but that tank system looked to me to be maybe 30 cubic metres, something like that. There's no compaction, so it just draws out. So if it draws out got a full 5 cubic metre tank on site, then it draws out 5 cubic metres and it occupies 5 cubic metres in the truck. Maybe with the vacuum system, maybe the air is sucked out of it and it might take up less space, I don't know. In this case, council, as far as I know, was only going to require one truck to start with, so it would need to make 3 visits to each building. And in time, once there are enough buildings, they might acquire more trucks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Don't know if anyone here is from or been to the UAE, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, but look, these sort of things are new for Australia and what we're trying to do. But when you go over there, there's sort of no bin day because it's all underground. It's all these vacuum systems throughout most of the places. So it's what an experience to see that. Thanks, everyone. We've been keeping on time quite well. So our final speaker, our fourth speaker, Louise Cannon, Principal Consultant at Mike Ritchie and Association, MRA Consulting Group. She has 20 years experience internationally for waste and resource management. Louise's early career was in the UK, comprised of projects which mainly comprised of collating waste data and creating complex modelling and forecasting for the waste flows over a 25-year period. This is to inform councils of their strategies and their business cases. She also has a comprehensive understanding of waste and contract management. So would you please welcome Louise to the lectern? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Let's see how this works. All right, so I'm here to talk to you today about bulky waste. We're just going to have a quick overview, get everyone on the same page, and we're going to look at the different collection models that we have in Australia at the moment. We're going to look at those service model attributes, what the models are in each of the states and what recovery levels we're seeing. We're going to have a little look at innovation, and then we might try and pick a winner as to which one is the best. All right, so bulky waste is generally described as items that don't fit in a standard bin. This can be, quite often councils have what they call accepted items that they will collect through their bulky waste services. There's generally a block of items which are restricted in volume or in weight sometimes, depending on what it is. And then there's generally a list of not accepted items. These can vary across councils, but this is a generalised statement. Okay, how are these materials collected? So the first one is called On Call. It's like a booked collection service by and it's collected by council or a contractor. This is the more traditional model. Residents contact the council to book in a collection, and it's generally capped on a number of collections per year, and it has volume limits associated with that. The second service model is what's called a scheduled collection, again done by council or a contractor. Now these are predetermined collection dates throughout the year, and it might be a certain day you get or a certain week of the year where you're going to get your bulky waste collected. It's generally limited to either annually or biannually or quarterly, and it's organised by zones or specific areas across the LGA to maximise that coverage for each event. Again, residents must limit the volume that they put out, and it provides that predictability for residents and service operators having a known time of the collection. And the third system offered is a drop-off by a resident. So they can drop off their bulky waste to the resource recovery centre or transfer station, and sometimes there's temporary convenient pop-up sites. Sometimes this is free, or there's a certain fee for certain items. There's generally no cap on the volume though. You can drop off at the site, and it's available all year round within the designated site's operational hours. There is a fourth one, which is a hybrid model of these systems, and that can provide some flexibility and ease of access for residents. However, it obviously brings complexity in managing a hybrid service. Going to move to comparing the benefits. So on call, we have the flexibility for the resident to call up. It's convenient for them. They do it on a day that they're going to be around. It offers collection from the actual property, which might be beneficial for those with accessibility challenges. The bookings process allows for a little bit of education. So I think that's also something you might not think about, that there's an opportunity there for sharing information with that resident. It sees higher rates of resource recovery compared to the scheduled service, and it's easier to enforce any volume limits compared to the scheduled service, which is much harder to enforce because they just put it out on the verge or the curbside. Looking back then at the scheduled service, this benefit has of having the optimal route planning for council or the service operator. This reduces the fuel and the labour costs per collection compared to the on-call service. There's predictability and timing, helps residents plan in advance. It also, however, though, has the lower rates of resource recovery compared to the on-call service. Looking at the benefits of a drop-off model, this requires the least resources. It has the most environmentally efficient service because the residents are taking their waste rather than a vehicle travelling around the streets. It encourages correct behaviour from residents because they get more opportunity to do the right thing. And the last one there, it provides the potential for the greatest opportunity for true cost recovery because council can control the cost based on an assessment of that material as the resident arrives at the drop-off site. Having a look at the disadvantages across the three systems, the on-call system has the disadvantage, I guess, is they're restricted to that acceptable items list and also a volume limit. It has the higher operational costs per collection because of the fleet and resourcing, and it also has that call centre admin burden. It has the costs of the new collection, the cost of a new service will obviously increase the rates to residents if it's a new service, and it's more environmentally inefficient due to that increase of resources. Those last two there are shared, those disadvantages are shared across the scheduled service as well. But particularly the disadvantages for the scheduled service is that it does lack the flexibility for residents who generate bulky waste outside of that specific, once a year schedule. Because it's just left on the side of the curb, it can be unsightly and result in some amenity issues. There's a lack of understanding or knowledge from residents on what happens to the items once collected, because they just dispose of it out onto the street. And there's return visits if residents claim they missed the scheduled service. So I'm sure some of you have experienced those residents. Some disadvantages with the drop-off service, it may present accessibility challenges for residents if the site isn't located within a reasonable distance of their home. There are fees associated with that disposal when they get there. If it's not a free drop-off, may deter users. And clearly there's going to be a high capital cost to establish the site with ongoing maintenance and cost infrastructure. Just a small thing to think about with some potential risks comparing between the three models. So the on-call service, there could be dissatisfaction from the resident if the service limitations aren't communicated well with regard to those volumes and that acceptable items. And if it's a new service, there could be that dissatisfaction from residents if the cost of the rates increases. That is also shared with the scheduled service, of course, if it's a new service. With the scheduled service, there is an increase in operational health and safety risks for operators, and you have the risk of that scavenging and illegal dumping issue. And one of the other risks with the drop-off is that if the service disadvantages are not managed well, that risk of community dissatisfaction with regard to not being able to get to the site. And the volume of material delivered cannot be managed. So you can't control how much material you're actually going to be collecting through that drop-off. All right, a quick look at some national statistics. So as you can see here, there's a varied amount of models across the different states. The one to probably focus on is which one's getting the highest diversion rate. So the drop-off with regard to where we do have the data, this was data across the last few years. There isn't very good data in this space to be able to compare across the states. But yeah, Western Australia had, through their drop-off service, had a 92% diversion or recovery rate. So clearly that's the one with the wins if you're rolling out this service for recovery. Is there any innovation in this space? In looking further afield, the UK they charge differing fees per item, so it does provide that direct incentive to minimise waste. Councils actively promote reuse and free online platforms, and they accept donations of reasonable goods for free at sites. Really interesting what's happening in Amsterdam. They're using some object detection technology within the bulky waste storage rooms at the bottom of their muds to distinguish between if it's bulky waste or litter. The system actually identifies key types of materials, and then that real-time data is collected from those daily scans and informs dynamic collection and planning and sorting, which then, as well as providing that ability, there's targeted campaigns to address any particular problem areas. So they're really getting some, optimising their resource recovery using, detection technology. So hopefully we'll see a lot more of that. Do we have any innovation in Australia? We do. Has anybody here, show of hands, heard of the FlexiSkip? Just a couple of people. For those of you who don't know, there's a service in southeast Queensland It appears to offer some higher diversion rates through than the ones we were seeing on the previous slide. The service provider Handle claim a diversion rate of 69 to 78%, and Able also claim to offer cost savings due to service efficiencies. I've just got a little video here to show you, to explain what.
As we exclusively revealed last year, curbside collection is getting a major shake-up on the Gold Coast. Now we can tell you exactly how it works, when it starts, and who can take advantage.
This is the future of curbside collection. Rather than rubbish piling up on footpaths for weeks on end, these bags can be filled with up to 1 tonne of garbage and collected for free any time at the touch of a button through a smartphone app or over the phone.
You can fill it up in a day or a week or a year.
Gold Coast Council blazing the trail, trialling an on-demand collection in select suburbs from next month.
It's really quite simple. You get a box like this delivered to your door. Inside is one of these blue flexi skips. This is what you put your rubbish into. Once it's full with everything you need taken away, simply get your phone, scan the code on the side, and a local driver like Tony here will come and collect it.
Queensland company Handel Group winning the contract to revolutionise the service.
The usual bulky curbside collections, you would put everything out on the verge, scavengers would come and take all the good commodities.
The current model sends everything to landfill. Now they're aiming to salvage or recycle at least 85%.
Everything that can be reused, like scooters and bikes, goes to the Endeavour Foundation. They fix them up and they sell it through their tip shops.
Also hoping for a reduction in illegal dumping.
Why wouldn't you just bring it to the verge and we take care of it and we get rid of it?
The trial only running in certain areas. Council will contact you if your house qualifies. Nick Kelly, 9 Gold Coast News.
There you go. He did a much better job than I could, so I thought I'd just play you that. So great work there. So can we do better in Australia? That's some innovation that is happening. Currently, I feel that the services that are being offered are out there for convenience and not necessarily for that resource recovery purpose. Clearly, the biggest limiting factor is that public participation and the condition of the items collected to be able to be recovered or go on to reuse. There is potential, though, for greater resource recovery, but careful consideration needs to be undertaken. So, your current collection contracts, are there options for variation or KPIs in the new service contract to drive that recovery? Are the economic levers there with cardboard and metals attracting the revenue? You obviously need to have use of a local sorting facility or a regional collection point to be able to do that recovery activity. Going to need some expansion of education programs to maximise uptake and then minimise that contamination. These need to be promoted. The promotion of community reuse programs would also be important. And fostering partnerships with social enterprises like the Handel Group were doing there with Endeavour Foundation, which can also offset council resources. So just as a summary, so the on-call model offers that flexibility but requires that robust scheduling to optimise the service routes, maximise efficiencies. It does generate a higher weight per service and lower cost due to that fewer overall pickups, but it suffers from having lower participation rates. The scheduled service provides a broader accessibility but comes with its challenges. It has that visual clutter from the early placement of waste on the curb, increased operational emissions from inefficient collection routes potentially, and that additional clean-up after scavenging. And the drop-off service does achieve the highest diversion rates. It's got that better segregation and reduced contamination, and the items are typically presented in a better condition, but it relies on the residents' access to suitable transport, which can limit equity and participation. So, is there a winner to which model you should pick? Well, it's the drop-off service, clearly, but it's complicated. It has that higher accessibility, the higher resource recovery, and the least operational costs. But I have some buts on the right. But council obviously have to have their own site, or they have to lease a site, and that site can only be used when it's actually open for residents. And then council need to have enough space to store the items prior to any bulk collection or resource recovery activities. And the resident needs to have a suitable transport option to get there. So I guess my conclusion is that, yeah, councils do need to prioritise that equity, transparency and effective communication to maximise community participation and service delivery. But it's definitely a complex area, especially if you want to focus on doing some greater resource recovery. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.
You just mentioned equity at the end there. In these kinds of systems, there's a tendency for some households to use the service all the time, and 80% of households never to use it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily an equitable service. I know other people say, oh, but not everyone drives a car, you know, but we all use the roads, all that sort of thing. Was that part of the consideration? And the other thing is that there are some councils that I can't think of any at the moment, but someone might know, who insist on bulky waste being separated into, say, cardboard, metals and everything else, and 3 trucks come past and collect each material separately. So there are innovative ways of separating. I just can't think of what the council was, but someone might know.
Yep. I think I agree with you. There is an opportunity there for that sort of initial separation at the curbside, which, yeah, is definitely a step forward with that resource recovery opportunity. Yeah. And with the equity piece, yeah, it's always going to be a challenge. And I think what I would suggest is that, you know, there's no silver bullet for this, and each council needs to take into account its, you know, the demographics of its residents and, you know, how close they are to the sites. So it's a very individualised service. There's definitely no silver bullet. Yeah.
Thanks for the report. Just wondering, when you compare the 3 systems, which system, if like one council moving from one system to another system, do you see the drop in the volume of the bulky waste collections?
When councils moving from what, sorry?
From one system to another system, do you see any drop in the volume of collections?
We didn't actually look at that as in the study that we did. Yeah, I wouldn't.
Hi, I'm Steph from Lismore Council. Just to respond to your question, I know of Clarence Valley Council went from scheduled collection where everyone just chucks the stuff out on the curb to a booked collection, and they really noticed a big difference. You know, I think the convenience of just chucking all your crap out the front versus actually ringing someone did make a difference. But yeah, thank you. I found this presentation really interesting because we've got waste vouchers at the moment, but our councillors are sort of kicking up a stink about why don't we have the curbside, big bulky collection sort of stuff. So I found that really informative, and I'm thinking I might go with a combination of maybe drop off and then a pick-up collection for like special needs, or just serve you know, people with disabilities or access issues and things like that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take the words for me, everyone. Just a quick comment before everyone goes. Just great presentation, really well broken down. It sort of makes me feel a bit comfortable about we spend about 40 million on our waste at Bayside Council. We run 4 household cleanups throughout the year, so it's a scheduled system. We get through about 250 a day because it is scheduled, easy to move through, where if we have the on-call, we get through about 60. So the cost can be 4 times for us as we've got these residents all the way through the place. We have a paid on-call as well, and we have 22 drop-offs. So if you want to pay for it outside of that, there it is. I know it seems extreme for 4, but our residents are very happy with it, straight through the domestic waste charge, so it's not too bad for us. In closing, I just want to do 2 things. I want to thank the events people, IT and comms people up the back there who keep this place running all the time. I want to thank Joe, who was my microphone attendee. Missed up a couple of times, had to hand it around myself. Thank the 4 speakers, fantastic presentations, all of you, really appreciate it, and everyone else, thank you. And if you want to speak to these guys here, more than welcome to come up in the break. So thank you. And Cleanaway, who are sponsoring afternoon tea. Thanks, everyone.